I recognize the senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I was not next in the queue. Senator Gardner was, but since I don't see him, I'm going to jump in great Senate fashion. Mr. President, I rise today to educate my colleagues and the American people on actions that are currently being taken by the Food and Drug Administration. And it deals with one specific thing that's familiar to all of us: combustible cigarettes. And it revolves around a decision that the FDA has just announced earlier this year, their plan to ban menthol combustible products. And their rationale for doing this is that menthol is the doorway for youth usage of tobacco products. Well, let me start and end at the same point. I'm going to start with this chart. This chart displays from 2011 to 2017 the CDC's annual study of youth usage of tobacco products. And specifically, this one addresses the use of menthol cigarettes, where we've seen a reduction of 5.8% to 2.5%. And somehow, as this chart displays, we've had a significant reduction in the use of menthol product for youth in this country. But with this trend line, we're now making the case as the federal government that we've got to ban this product because it's what's fueling an increase in youth usage. Now, over the same period, youth usage of combustible cigarettes has dropped 12.5%. By any standard we would look at, we would say we've got an education program in America that's actually having the right impact, where between what we educate, parental guidance, school pressures, that the usage of our youth is going down. This would be something that typically we would praise. But no, an administration that came in primarily saying we're here to reduce the regulation of the federal government has picked one area that not only is it not reducing, it's disregarding the trends that we see, and it's coming out with new regulations that, at the end of the day, are going to take adults that we haven't either provided the tools for them to stop using combustible cigarettes, or who have made a conscious choice that they want to use a legal product that they know up front is harmful to their health. Now, to successfully talk about this, I have to sort of hit rewind and go back 10 years. Because it was 10 years ago in 2009 that the Congress of the United States took up the tobacco control bill. And I will say it was a controversial debate. I spent hours on this floor. And here were some of the points I made in 2009, that H.R. 1256, which was the Tobacco Control Act, did not provide a pathway to market for new tobacco products. New tobacco products, products that technologically we could create that provided a level of satisfaction for its users but didn't have the harmful effects of the combustion of tobacco. Innovative products, we see them on the marketplace today. They're there not because of the guidance of the Food and Drug Administration over 10 years of total control over the tobacco industry. They're there because the marketplace demanded it. Consumers said, give me a tool to switch. And we've gone from gum to patches to now electronic cigarettes. It was believed at the time that because we centralized tobacco regulation within an agency that understands how to use scientific information to make decisions, that they would look at trend lines like this and they would make decisions that were consistent with it. That as technology became more available, we can determine how to put a heart valve in with it being less invasive through the use of technology. But over 10 years, we haven't figured out how to write a foundational rule to tell companies how they need to apply to get an e-cigarette approved. Now, when we went into this 10 years ago, HHS claimed that the department would need $100 million to establish an agency solely focused on tobacco products. Well, we did them one better. We imposed user fees on the tobacco industry. And for every piece of tobacco product that is sold, they pay to the FDA a user fee on that product. And it's that user fee that has funded the FDA effort. In 2019, FDA received $712 million in user fees from the industry. Now, let me put that in perspective. Everybody who buys a tobacco product is paying a higher price today so that this money can go to the FDA. So the FDA hopefully will create a foundational pathway that will allow them to approve and receive applications for reduced harm products. It's very consistent with this trend line of money that we pumped into education to reduce youth usage, to encourage adults to switch. But until it's illegal in the United States, adults ought to have the freedom to choose the products that they want. Unfortunately, 10 years later, we're in no better position than we were 10 years ago, where the choices are combustible products or products that have yet to even have an established pathway by the FDA. Those that are venturing out today offering e-cigarettes and alternatives are doing it with the understanding that tomorrow the FDA could walk in and say, we're going to pull this product off the marketplace because it hadn't been approved. Yet the FDA has never created the pathway and shown an individual or a company the application process to get a product like this approved. Now, 10 years ago, before TCA was signed into law, there were 14 agencies that regulated tobacco in the United States. It was the Treasury Department, the Transportation Department, Commerce, Justice, Executive Office of the President, HHS, Education, Labor, General Services Administration. It's now consolidated into one. You'd think we would do a much better job at doing it. I'm going to share with you the conclusion, and I'll come back to this a couple of times. There's an age restriction on the purchase of tobacco today. It is 18. We can have a debate as to whether it should be 21. We can have a debate about moving the age. But when an agency who has the sole control for tobacco cannot enforce the age requirement for it to be purchased, you have to ask yourself, by taking away options that adults have, does that in any way, shape, or form affect youth usage when the youth are illegally accessing product today? You see, back when 14 agencies controlled it, and as being a former governor, the presiding officer may remember some of this, states actually enforced because the federal mandate was to enforce the age requirements. We do it on alcohol today, and some places they do it on tobacco. But when we centralized all the authority at the FDA apparently gave up on the age requirement, and they only focused on things like this, where they can manipulate through government regulation, through onerous actions on the consumers, what they want to accomplish, which I would suggest to my colleagues and to the American people is not driven by facts or science. It's driven by politics. It's driven by those that want to see this product eliminated. I'll say what I said 10 years ago. I'm ready for the debate. Let's bring it to the floor. You can talk about debating it. This is eerily similar to Canada a few years ago when they banned menthol products. How did they follow that up? This year, they legalized cannabis. Maybe that's the route we're on. We can have that debate at any point. But right now, that's illegal in the United States, and we put up with it with states that have legalized it. I'm not sure it's a good move for adults. I'm not sure it's a good move for our youth. It certainly has the same combustible concerns that we have with tobacco products. But there's a difference between the two. This is legal. This we have agreed that if you're over 18, you can choose to use it with an extensive educational campaign to tell everybody why it's harmful to their health. Now, also 10 years ago, I offered an amendment to create a department within HHS known as the Tobacco Harm Reduction Center, requiring public ranking of tobacco products according to their risk. That amendment would have allowed for the development of new products to encourage individuals to give up traditional tobacco products and turn to less harmful products. I remember the debate well, and my colleagues who were opposed to me on the debate said, if we centralize this at FDA, the natural reaction will be that they will migrate to not only the application being understood as to how to process it, but they will be inclined to approve those products quickly because of the alternative that we know today. We're 10 years later and we have no transitional foundational pathway for a manufacturer to know how to apply to the FDA or what standards they have to meet. It's almost like we're going to make it up as we go along. So therefore, these products are on the marketplace, but there's no application process at the FDA. They're susceptible to millions of dollars of investment being yanked tomorrow because somebody wakes up and says, my gosh, youth have started using e-cigarettes. The presiding officer knows there's an 18 age requirement on e-cigarettes as well. Is the answer to that to remove all of that product for every American because we can't figure out a way to enforce an age limitation? I would suggest to my colleagues, if that's where we're headed, we're going to eliminate some products that will cause chaos in this country. I suggest that this will not cause chaos, but this will be the wrong signal that we send to adults that prefer to use this product. And we do it under the false pretense that we're doing this because of America's youth. America's youth is doing the right thing. They're reducing their usage of combustible products. They're not enticed by things like menthol. Yet they're the ones that we're using to be the fig leaf of all this new government regulation that the Food and Drug Administration is proposing to do. Now, within the Office of the Tobacco Control, they have 778 employees. They're close to 1,000 employees in the Center for Drug Review. Put that in perspective. All the drugs that are out there, all the applications that are going through. We've got almost as many people in the Tobacco Control Agency as we do in Drug Review. Well, the one thing I can show you about Drug Review is they actually do process applications. It's long, it's laborious. We'd like to speed that up. It averages under the latest PDUFA reauthorization, the user fee for drugs, 304-day average to process an application. Well, the review of a modified risk, so if you've changed the risk of a combustible, if you have decided as a manufacturer you're going to change the paper on the cigarette because there's technology that assures you that paper's not going to burn and somebody's not going to fall asleep and burn a house down. When they change that, that has to go through a modification review at the FDA. How long does a modification review take currently? 360 days. 56 days longer than that of a new drug application actually working its way through the Food and Drug Administration. Can't claim that there are not enough people. There's ample people, and the FDA has hired 267 employees in the tobacco control since 2017. The numbers may actually be identical now. So, as I said earlier, Mr. President, in 2019, the FDA will receive $712 million in user fees from the industry. Of the $582 million in user fees collected by the FDA in 2018, which we've just completed, $205 million originated from the sale of combustible menthol cigarettes. So this one proposal is going to reduce by 1/3 the amount of money that the regulatory agency has. And I might share with the presiding officer, because I think he would find this of great interest, having left the state of Florida as governor, that there's a tax revenue piece tied to this. A ban on the sale of menthol cigarettes will generate a significant revenue loss for state, federal, and local governments. Last year, menthol sales brought in $4.1 billion in federal excise tax. It brought in $9.1 billion in state and local excise tax. It brought in $1.8 billion in state and local sales tax. That's a total of $15.2 billion. Of that, 2/3 of it is state and local governments that will lose over $10 billion in revenue from this one decision, the elimination of a choice for adults, all under the belief and sales pitch to the American people that this is going to stop youth usage of tobacco. Bull. We're not going to stop youth usage until we enforce the age limit, whether it's 18, 20, 21, wherever we set it. And we've eliminated enforcement of the age when we consolidated 10 years ago all of this into one entity at the Food and Drug Administration. So my suggestion to my colleagues is we've gotten no benefit out of this. If anything, we've lost because we don't enforce age. We've gotten no new innovative product. We're not even on the horizon looking at a proposed pathway. There's not a pathway. I question whether there's even one perceived, even though we have 1,000 people working at CTP, soon to be cut by 1/3 by their own proposal that's going to eliminate user fees based upon the loss of sales of menthol product. So I say to my colleagues, it's extremely important that you understand that when Commissioner Gottlieb announced his reform initiative for the regulation of tobacco in July 28th of 2017, and I recognize the fact that we moved from administration to administration, we moved from commissioner to commissioner, and most come in and say, the last guy did it all wrong, I'm going to do it differently. I hold him at his word on July 28th when he said that, and he said in that announcement, the goals of the new approach include the development of foundational regulations to provide the rules of the road for the review of tobacco product applications and a path to market for less harmful products as part of the solution to end the cycle of disease and death. Let me repeat what I said earlier. FDA has yet to issue a single foundational rule as called for in July of 2017. The proposed version of one SE rule is currently under review at the OMB. Now, if you're now the single agency in charge of the regulation of tobacco and you're looking at how to reduce the harm of the product, wouldn't your first focus be on how you approve technological products that meet the threshold of reduced risk? And if you saw an increase in youth usage, would you not look at a period of time like 7 years and ask yourself, is this an anomaly? Now, we'll have a report next month from CDC of their annual tobacco survey. There must be something alarming in it relative to youth usage of e-cigarettes alone. And I don't dispute what they found. If, in fact, we find menthol took a spike up and they say 11% of our youth are using it, I'll question the science of their survey with the trend that has consistently built over the last 7 years. But I would also make this point, that if there's an age limitation on e-cigarettes, just like there is on combustible, are we not smart first to go in and find an enforcement mechanism for age if, in fact, our concern is that our youth are using the product? In essence, what they've done with the menthol rule is they've suggested we don't want to enforce the age thing. That's hard. What's easy for us to do is to do something that is political. It doesn't change much, but we can go out and say, look at what we did. We eliminated access to this product. The majority of the people who use this product are adults. The tax revenues at the state, local, federal are huge. As a matter of fact, one of the settlements that was made when prior to the Tobacco Control Act was the Master Settlement Agreement. That's before the presiding officer was governor. It was before some in this room might have been born. It was in 1998, and it was a significant change for an industry. They agreed not only to defray Medicaid costs at the state levels, they agreed to an annual payment, and that annual payment was more than $200 billion in manufacturer funds to defray the cost of health care to states through Medicaid, resulting from the use of tobacco products to develop cessation programs to get Americans to quit smoking. Let me suggest to you that it's not the industry that's fighting it. It's the industry that's fueling this. They're funding it. They're the ones funding the CTP. They're the ones funding the education programs. They're actually the ones that are funding, supplementing the Medicaid of states. Well, let me say to Commissioner Gottlieb and to those bright folks over at CTP, when you do this, you're eliminating a portion of that $200 billion that is calculated based upon the sale of products in the marketplace, and you're reducing the shared cost of Medicaid. You're reducing for many states who have diverted that money to other things, economic development. I think one state was building sidewalks in one large city with tobacco money. I could be critical of how they've done it and what they've used it for, but I do know this. I went through far enough in math that if you reduce the amount of sales and the payment is figured based upon sales, then you're reducing the take that states, cities are going to get from taxes or from the settlement. So I say to my colleagues, concentrate on this number. 2.5% was the last number that CDC came out and said, of our youth, this is the percentage that use menthol products. We should not quit till that number is zero. If you want to make that number zero for youth under 18 today for all tobacco products, I got the answer. Enforce the law. Hold retailers accountable. Do the same raids on them on tobacco that you do on alcohol, and we probably will never get to zero, but we might do better than 2.5% of menthol or 8.5% of overall tobacco usage. Madam President, I want to summarize because I know there are other colleagues that want to speak. And I assure my colleagues, and I assure Commissioner Gottlieb, and I assure all the individuals that work at the CTP, at the Food and Drug Administration, I'm going to be down here every week. These are going to get longer and longer. They're going to get more detailed and more detailed because I want my colleagues to understand that weren't here the debate we went through, the decisions we made, the assumptions that those that were for consolidating this into one agency versus having authorities in multiple agencies, what they said would happen. Because I can get my own report card, and I'm giving it to you. They've done zero. All of these things about reduced harm products that the FDA was going to set up transitional, foundational rules, they don't exist. It's 10 years later. It's 2 years after the current commissioner got in and said, we're going to do this. Well, I'm still waiting. But rather than produce those where adults can take advantage of tools to get off of combustible cigarettes, what's the action all of a sudden they take? To everybody's amazement, they say, we're going to ban menthol from the marketplace. Now, I mentioned Canada earlier. They banned menthol, and 3 years later, they approved cannabis as a legal product. I'm not accusing the administration of having that pathway, though it does raise some suspicion. This is certainly not the administration of reduced regulation and onerous government when you see what the FDA is proposing to a legal consumer product. But I will say this, that the commissioner announced not long ago that they were beginning to review products that were derived from cannabis, oils and other things, that they thought they could safely approve for use in the United States. Well, Mr. Commissioner, you're only fueling my fears that you're following the roadmap that Canada followed. That this is all a bait and switch thing. Not only is it not valid to suggest that we're doing this because of our youth, you're doing it to prove that the Food and Drug Administration can overreach and not be slapped. And that somewhere down the road, you may come to the same conclusion that Canada did. Rather than enforce opioids and illegal drugs, let's just approve them. Let's make them legal. Boy, that's a sad day. You know, it's shocking to me as one that has been engaged in this debate for now 25 years. We're extremely worried about the combustible impact of cigarettes, and we should be. But states don't have any concerns about the combustible nature of cannabis. There are no filters on it. There's no regulations on the paper that's used, even though it's legal in some states. As a matter of fact, we have less research on cannabis in this country than any legal product that exists, including Band-Aids. There's more research and development and approval that goes into Band-Aids than goes into cannabis in those states that it's either legal as recreational or medical use. So, Commissioner Gottlieb, in the insane world that you have created, if you're going to head down this road, one, expect Congress to weigh in. But two, understand that if you begin to loosen up the legal use of cannabis, then we're going to hold you to the same standards you've displayed for everything else, that you hold a drug manufacturer to, that you hold a drug device manufacturer, and quite honestly, that you hold the tobacco industry to. Don't think that you're going to slide this by and that there's not going to be regulations that we're going to adopt the Canada model or that we're going to let states continue to do what they're doing. If you're worried about something burning a product and inhaling it into your lungs, you better be just as concerned about it as it relates to marijuana. Why there's no effort, given that this is legal from a recreational or a medical standpoint, and there's no effort at FDA to study this and put science out, only suggests to me that science is not important. Yet this is the institution that is the gold standard for the use of science. It is scientific, the reason it takes 304 days to get a new drug approved. It is not scientific that it takes 360 days, that when you change the paper on a combustible cigarette, that it takes that long to approve that that is now acceptable. Madam President, I'm not creating this pathway. The FDA did it. And it started with the Congress of the United States providing this much authority with one agency, an agency that they believed could do everything. And because they're not funded by the Congress of the United States for this piece, they're funded by the industry, you know what? They think we have no say in it. And the 75% of new drug applications that are filed and reviewed and approved, you know who funds those? The drug industry. And the 73% of the medical device industry of applications they review and they approve, who funds those? The medical device industry. And generic drugs, which we all wanted more and more generic drugs because it's driving down the cost of drugs in America. And all of a sudden, the FDA had a backlog that was years long at approving generic applications. They said, if only we had a user fee agreement for generic drugs, and that user fee agreement is over 60% of the cost of approving a generic drug, and what's happened. The backlog is every bit as big today as it was when the user fee was created. So if my colleagues wonder why I'm standing in the way of a user fee agreement right now for over-the-counter drugs, I figured this out. They get funded by the industry. Their actual work goes down. The American people pay the tab for the user fees that are sent to the FDA. The price of drugs, devices, cigarettes, over-the-counter drugs goes up. And when Congress stands up and says, explain this, they look at us and we control 25% of their budget for any given center, and they say, we're going to go talk to the people that pay 75% of our budget, not to you. Last thing I'll share with you is 25 years ago, it wasn't like this. 25 years ago, we appropriated everybody's budget in the administration. 100% of the money for the FDA was appropriated out of here. It meant when I, as a member of the United States Senate, picked up the phone and called the FDA, they didn't want to answer it on the phone. They wanted to come to my office that day and they wanted to answer it. They wanted to actually solve a problem. I just went through a period of time where I gave FDA 2 weeks to respond to letters, in some cases that took a month to get a response. They don't think that we play a role in this, yet we set legislation priorities for the country. I would suggest to my colleagues, this is an isolated example that's true, but it is an example of a much bigger problem within the Food and Drug Administration and this commissioner, that Congress is insignificant to them. That you can be called up to provide oversight in front of a committee, and you can say whatever, because we have no clarity, no transparency inside the system, so they can tell me that the review time has gone down 47 days since last year. I don't know whether it's accurate. I can only tell you this. I don't see it in the numbers of third parties that do reviews. I see actions like this with no science to substantiate it, and I have to question the science that they use across the landscape of products that they review. The Food and Drug Administration regulates 25 cents of every dollar of the U.S. economy. This ought to be something that not just my colleagues, but the American people should be concerned with. If you believe my argument is half accurate and this is ill-advised, for God's sakes, pick up the phone and call the White House switchboard and tell the president that came in to reduce regulation that there's an agency that's not listening. Not only is there an agency that's not listening, he's got a commissioner that went on Twitter. There was a tweet that said the president's numbers are going down. The commissioner liked the tweet. Maybe I'll say that one a few more times so the president will see it or hear it. But maybe somebody's listening that will tell him. I'm not interested in a single individual's political goal, because this has to be an individual political goal, because there's no science to substantiate what they're doing. And the loser is localities in taxes, states in settlement payments, but more importantly, adults who choose this product because it's legal. And now the FDA says with a strike of a pen, we can eliminate it. It's no longer a choice you've got. That's not the America I signed up for. But I did sign up to come here and to fight things that I thought weren't in the best long-term interest of the country. This is the top of my list right now. You'll hear me here often. I yield the floor.